Today's daf is Chulin daf Mem Dalid, and we are about 30 lines from the bottom of daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis Itmar Turbitz Haveshet. Today's daf is being learned as a schus refuah shalema for Chava Miriam Bas Malka Freda and Shloima ben Chayaleh. So we're at the very, very beginning of the third parak of Maseches Chulin, Perik Elu Trefus, which of course is a continuation of everything that we've been learning this entire Masechta, and that is the laws of Shchitas Chulin, albeit with a very, very focus on Se'if Katan within the world of Shchitas Chulin, and that is the world of Trefus. Now, today's daf is going to be a little bit more anatomy and physiology of an animal, with a dagush on the veshet, the esophagus of the animal, more specifically, what's known as the turbitz haveshet. Towards the latter part of the daf, we're going to go from the veshet to its kampadre, which of course is the gargeres, also known as the kane, also known as the trachea. So the Mishnah said that a nekev, the size of a mashu in the veshet, would render the animal into a treifa. The Gemara now is going to bring a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel with regards to one specific part of the veshet, what the Gemara refers to as the turbitz haveshet, and the machlokes is going to be whether a nekev b'mashu on the turbitz haveshet is like the veshet itself, with halachas it would render it into a treifa, or whether the turbitz haveshet is different. So that just like when it comes to most devarim in the guf of a behema, a nekev b'mashu would not make it a treifa. Usually you would need that roiv of it should be severed in order to even be having this conversation. Could be the turbitz haveshet, in contrast to the veshet itself, is treated more like one of these other evarim. The bottom line is, turbitz haveshet, a nekev the size of a mashu, would that make it a treifa, or would that not make it a treifa? So, of course, the first thing that we need to do is define what exactly is the turbitz haveshet. So, driving at a lane here, but very high level, the esophagus is what attaches the throat of the animal to the stomach, the digestive tract of the animal. So the two simanim, the two tubes that Masechtas Chulin very much focuses on, are the trachea and the esophagus. The trachea attaches the throat to the lungs, and the esophagus attaches the throat to the digestive tract to the stomachs. In the vernacular, the esophagus, the veshed, is mechuber to the animal on the top part of the animal through the lechi, through the jaw, that's the throat area, and on the bottom, it's mechuber to the digestive tract through the keres, which is the name of a stomach. We know an animal has 4 stomachs, so this is the keres hapnimi. So it's attached to the lechi on the one hand, and it's attached to the keres hapnimi on the other hand. The turbitz is the part of the veshet that's at the very, very top, close to the lechi. In English, it's known as the pharynx, but it's the top part of the veshet. You can almost look at it as even not the veshet per se, but rather some muscular something that attaches the veshet to the lechi. But to keep it simple, just think of it as the top part of the veshet. It's where the veshet meets the lechi. It's where the esophagus attaches the throat, meaning it's on the upper part. Now we'll see the Gemara is going to get into a more nuanced breakdown of the turbitz haveshet, the veshet itself, but I think as far as an introduction, to keep it as simple as possible, just thinking of it as that top area, just in terms of where does the word turbitz even come from? That's not a word that you see every day. So Rashi says the word turbitz is miloshin tarbitza, which is a field, which is a chotzer. So we know that Chazal very often use the mishalim, everyday language, to describe scientific and more complex ideas. So just like a house has a chutzner in front of it, it's the Pesach, it's the proizder, it's the entranceway. So you don't go straight into the living room, you walk through a chutzner, and then you come to the front step and you knock on the door and you wait, available, not available, right? That's usually how this plays itself out. So in the front of the veshet, you have this area known as the turbitz haveshet. That's where this obscure word comes from. Either way, zok the Gemara, itmar turbitz haveshet, as it relates to this this area that's known as the turbas haveshet. Rav said that if there's a neck of the size of a mashu, it's going to make it a treifa. Shmuel says no, the turbas haveshet is not treated like the veshet itself, and as a result, a neck of the size of a mashu would not make it into a treifa unless roiv of it was severed, roiv of the thickness of it was punctured. Then the halach is it would not be considered a treifa. What is the machlokes? So the Gemara explains. Rav Amar b'mashu. Rav says that the turbas haveshet, a neck of the size of a mashu, would be considered a nekev makom shchito, because Rav held that the turbas haveshet is like the veshet as it relates to shchita. So one of the two simanim of an animal is the veshet. That's the makom hashchita. Rav held that the turbas haveshet is a part of the veshet where you can do the shchita. So we know that not every part of the veshet is kosher l'shchita. Not every part of the kana is kosher l'shchita. In fact, one of the 5 halachas in Moshe Sinai, known as Hagrama, that the Gemara discussed in great detail on Daf Yud Ches and Daf Yud Tes, deals with what part of the kana and the veshet is going to be okay. So Rav holds that the turbas haveshet is considered makom shchita. So if it's makom shchita and has a din veshet as it relates to makom shchita, so it's going to have a din veshet as it relates to the nekev as well. Of nekev the size of a mashu in the veshet proper makes it into a treifa. In the turbas haveshet, it's going to be the same thing. Shmuel says berubai. He says no, it's going to be berubai because it's not makom shchito, because he holds it's not the makom shchita. And if somebody would shecht the turbas haveshet, it would not be considered a shchita in the veshet. Oh, if it's not considered the veshet with regards to makom shchita, it's also not considered the veshet with regards to a nekeb mashu making it into a treifa. Says the Gemara, Hai niu turbas haveshet. So what part of the veshet is the actual turbas haveshet? Amar Mori bar Mar Ukva Amar Shmuel. So Mori bar Mar Ukva said in the name of Shmuel, Kol shechaytchay umarchiv zehu turbas haveshet. So if you go to the very, very top of the veshet and you cut it, what's going to happen is the opening is going to expand a little bit. So this was an idea that we had all the way back on Daf Ches already, that the makom hashchita is mirvach ravach, right? There's this idea that sometimes shchita will cause something not to contract, which you would maybe think intuitively what it would do, but the hole all of a sudden becomes wider. So you shecht it and it spreads open. So the top part of the veshet, when you cut it, it's marchiv, and Shmuel said that that is the area known as the turbas haveshet. If, however, you would cut the veshet underneath that area, a place where when you cut it, it doesn't expand, it's oimid b'mkoimai, zeo veshet atzmai, that would already be considered the veshet. So if you get towards the top of the veshet, there's an area where you cut it, the sides are going to stay in place. Then there's an area where you cut it, where the sides are actually going to expand. That is the cutoff line as it relates to where the veshet ends and where the turbas haveshet begins. Amali Rapapi. So Rapapi told Mari Bar Ukva, Mar lo yamar hachi. I heard from the Rebbe differently. Umani, who is the Rebbe? Rabbi Barabaya. Rabbi Barabaya. Elo, what did Rabbi Barabaya say? Not like Shmuel. Rather, that area, which is not the tippy top, but it's close to it, where if you cut it, it's not going to expand. It's going to stay in place. That's still part of the turbas haveshet. What's the area that's the veshet atzmi? It's the area that when you cut it, it's going to not expand, not stay in place, but rather it's going to contract. So it seems that when you get towards the top of the veshet, just taiching the Gemara, so there's these 3 locations. As you get towards the top, the veshet, if you cut it, it's going to contract, which, by the way, that's like the whole veshet underneath it as well. You go a little bit higher than that, it's going to stay in place. And when you go a little bit higher than that, it's going to actually expand. And it's those top 2 areas that there was this debate amongst Amiram. Do we view that as the turbas haveshet or not? Meaning, for sure, the top part where it expands is the turbas haveshet, and that's what Shmuel held is the turbas haveshet. Anything beneath that is actually not. Rabbi Barabaya said no, that even beneath that, the area where it stays in place is eichet the turbas haveshet. That's also the chotzer of the veshet. You want to know what the veshet proper is? It's kol shechaytchay v'kavitz. Stating that, the Gemara brings a third shita. Yoina Amar Reb Zera. So believe it or not, there's a little bit of a shaila here. It's actually almost hard to believe. If this Yoina is referring to the Amira Reb Yoina, or rather it's referring to Yona, as in a dove. This is a Shaila, the Pashtus is referring to Reb Yoina. The Beis Yosef brings a Yeshayrim that says that the Yoina over here is actually a halacha as it relates to the turbas haveshet of a Yoina. And even though it's not the yoin as opposed to the tar, right? But a yoin is a name of a kosher bird. It's one of the 2 kosher birds that were allowed to be put on the mizbech, and that's what yoina means over here. But we'll go with the pashut shot, and that yoina is Reb Yoina. Reb Zera was saying over in the name of Reb Zera. Incidentally, I saw a Bruva Margolis in his Netzutzayar has a ha'ara on this Gemara, right? There's not a lot in the Netzutzayar. On this Gemara, he has a ha'ara. B'koishi one adaf, and he says that if you know throughout Shas bekama mekaymes bebavli ubi Yerushalmi, you find Rabbi Yoina saying over Torah in the name of Reb Zera. In Yerushalmi, it's in the name of Reb Zeira. Of course, Reb Zera. So for sure, a lot of credibility to the pashtus, and that is Yoina Reb Zera. And then, of course, he has a maramakim from somewhere else. I think it's a Yerushalmi that would support the idea that we would use the Yoina to describe just the bird. So he says both shitas be'etzim. If you're a Sinai, you would know have some sort of makar. This is classic. But either way, what did Reb Yoina say to Reb Zera? He said mavlata. You want to know where the turbetz haveshet is? It's the real top of the veshet. It's all the way mamish in the throat. So even if you're in the area where if you cut it, it's going to expand, lav dafka, that's going to be considered the turbetz haveshet. It would have to be really towards the top. Okay, how close to the top? So the Gemara explains, Rab Avya said, Pachas misa'arta, it's less from the throat than the length of a grain of barley. However, it's a little bit more than the length of the grain of wheat. Bottom line. So we have a machlokes Rav and Shmuel regarding the turbetz haveshet. Then we have a machlokes between Shmuel, Rabibi bar Abaya, and Rabbi Yoina in the name of Rab Zera, what exactly the turbetz haveshet even is. But as it relates to the machlokes Rav and Shmuel, that's the segue to the next part of the daf. Rav held a nekev in the turbetz haveshet is like a nekev in the veshet. It's b'mashu that it becomes a treifa. Shmuel held that no. A nekev in the veshet, treifa b'mashu, in the turbetz haveshet, would have to be berubai. The Gemara explained what is the beer in the machlokes. The beer in the machlokes is Rav held that the turbetz haveshet is a makom shchita. So if the turbetz haveshet is a makom shchita, well, that means that it's mamish the veshet. So if it's mamish the veshet, then ta'aloch l'moshe misinai, that said, a nekeb b'mashu would render veshet treifa. So, well, it's going to be a treifa. Shmuel holds it's not the makom shchita. If it's not the makom shchita, so it's not the veshet per se in the world of shchita, hence also not in the world of treifas, and therefore in that instance, it's actually going to have to be berubai. It's interesting, just one point that Rashi makes a very big deal about throughout the sugya, and that is, if you remember on Daf Yud Ches and Daf Yud Kes, when the Gemara talked about the halacha l'moshe misinai of hagrama, so there was a huge discussion, what is the upper limit of the shchita in the kana? So what's hagrama? Hagrama defines where on the kana, where in the veshet, you're allowed to do the shchita, which really would mean that if you were going to open up the Shulchan Aruch and see the seif that talks about hagrama, you would need 4 seifei kata. I would have to know the upper limit of the kana, the lower limit of the kana. I would have to know the upper limit of the veshet and the lower limit of the veshet. In the sugya on Daf Yud Ches and Daf Yud Tes, the Mishnah that talked about these laws, it only mentioned one of the 4. It mentioned the upper limit of the kana. It said nothing about the lower limit of the kana, and it didn't even talk about the veshet. Now, in the maskan of that Gemara, as it relates to the upper limit of the kana, it was a huge shaila. How far up? The kova, the shipoya kova, right? A whole bunch of different terms, again, mashalim, that Chazal used to describe what the upper limit of the kana is, but didn't mention a word about the lower limit of the kana. It didn't mention a word about the vesha. If you think about it, this machlokes Rav and Shmuel is really the answer to another one of those quadrants, and that is, what is the upper limit of the shchita of the veshet? If Rav holds that the turbetz haveshet is a makom shchita, so that means you can go as high up as you want. The turbetz haveshet for sure is that upper area. Right, that's where it starts. But if you're going to tell me the whole turbetz haveshet neked amashu, and it's because it's a makom shchita, that means you're allowed to shecht all the way to the top. That means shitas Rav is there is no hagrama on the top part of the veshet as it relates to shchita. Whereas Shmuel says, of course, it's hagrama. The hagrama is the turbetz haveshet. What is turbetz haveshet? Well, that's a shaila. We have 3 days what the turbetz haveshet is. But this machlokes Rav and Shmuel, which is a machlokes machlokes in Hilchos Treifas really is so yisoidi in the world of shechita. It's not just could I shech, could I not shech. I mean, that's as yisoidi as you're going to get. But if you think about it, this is a definition of 1/4 of one of the 5 halachos l'Moshe Messina. We'll see it's going to play itself out a little bit more in the course of the daf. But either way, the Gemara is going to tell a story, and this is a real chulin de gemaisa. It doesn't involve a puritz, it doesn't involve a krechma. What it involves is a shar. Ahutura. There was a shar. The hava livnei Rav Ukva. It belonged to the sons of Rav Ukva. The asvach is shchita beturbetz haveshet. So the sheichet shechted this shar. He started the shchita in the infamous turbetz haveshet. And he concluded it in the Veshet. And then he went to Rava and he said, Rava, I don't know, is this a kosher animal? Is it not a kosher animal? I think I might have botched up. I started shechting it in the Turbetz HaVeshet. So Rava said, I'm going to tell you the halacha. I'm going to impose the chumrah of Rav and the chumrah of Shmuel. I'm going to render it a treifa. And Rav explained, I'm going to be machman like Rav the Amar Rabba Mashu. Rav holds that a nekev in the Turbetz HaVeshet the size of a mashu makes it into a treifa. Now, you're going to tell me, said Rava, Rav said makom shchita. According to Rav, it's a makom shchita, so it's not a treifa, right? Just to be clear, a nekev in the Veshet b'mashu is a treifa, but that's only if it didn't happen machmas to shchita. If the shchita is what made the nekev, well, that's what you're supposed to do. So then it's going to be okay. So Rav said that a nekev b'mashu in the Turbetz HaVeshet makes it a treifa. But that's a terrible mistake, because to the extent that Rav holds that it's also the makam hashchita, well, if it's the makam hashchita, obviously, then everything is going to be okay. Narvas kishmul. Rav said, I'm going to be machman like Shmuel. I'm allowed makam shchita, who holds that the Turbetz HaVeshet is not a makom shchita. So if it's not a makom shchita, you can't look at it as a shchita. But Shmuel, but if you hold like Shmuel Amma Berubai, Shmuel holds that nekev b'mashu is not going to be an issue in the Turbetz HaVeshet. I'll be kirav dama b'mashu. For that array, I'm going to go like Rav. Either way, Rava said, I'm going l'chumr like Rav, l'chumr like Shmuel, and therefore I'm going to paskin that this animal is not going to be okay. K'chumr de Rav, that a nekev b'mashu in Turbetz HaVeshet makes it into a treifa. And k'chumr de Shmuel, that it's not a makom shchita. What's the point? Let's just analyze it a little bit better, because the Gemara is going to make a huge deal about this story. Really, in Rav's world, this was kosher, and in Shmuel's world, this was kosher. The reason in Rav's world this was kosher is because, according to Rav, this was just a regular shchita. You started in the right place and you ended in the right place. In Shmuel's world, this was also a kosher shchita. The reason is because although you didn't start in the right place, but at the same time, that nekev that you made was only b'mashu, it wasn't berubai, it wasn't enough to make it into a treif. Now, the truth is, Tosfos sends us, we're not going to go into this, to Daf Yotes, because if you remember, in the Sugi of Agrama, it's mavur that even if you get roiva the shchita right, but if you start in the wrong place, that could be is going to be an issue. And it happens to be shita Shmuel and Daf Yotes, and Tais asks to steer Shmuel at the Shmuel. It's beyond the scope of what we need for Pashim Shan and the Gemara. But just from a practical perspective, really, me'ikar adin, this should be kasha aliba de Rav, and this should be kasha aliba de Shmuel. It should be kasha aliba de Rav because it's the makom shchita. It should be kasha aliba de Shmuel because although the fact that it's not a makom shchita, but at the same time, a treif, it does eichnish. What did Rava do? Rava had his cake and he ate it too. Rava said, I'm going to be machmer k'chumer de Rav, k'chumer de Shmuel. I'm going to be machmer like Rav, and I'm going to say that it makes it a treifa, but I'm going to be machmer like Shmuel and say it's not a makom shchita. So a nekev, shaloi b'makom shchita, Shaloi b'shas shchita is for sure going to be a nekev, and as a result, it's going to be a problem. So the Gemara says, Yigalgal Milsa. This story made its rounds, literally. That's what Yigalgal means. And he made it to Rababa. So Rababa heard about the story. So we're familiar with Naskid de Rababa. That's something every yeshiva bacher knows. This is Tura de Rababa. So all of a sudden, this shar makes its way to Rababa. Not alive, but the story of the shar. Amalahu. So Rababa told them, Tura, this shar, bein l'Rab, bein l'Shmuel shari. It's mutter side coin to Rav, side coin to Shmuel. Like we mentioned, going to Rabba was shchita, and according to Shmuel, it's not a treifa. Zilu amru leila breder Rabbi Yosef bar Chama. He said, "Go tell the son of Rabbi Yosef bar Chama, also known as Rava to us." By the way, Geshmaka Rashi. Rashi says, "V'hu Rava de Kuli Talmuda." Bar plukte da abai. Right? How would you explain Rava to somebody? If somebody says, "Can you please describe Rava?" I think the best way to describe it is, the bar plukta of Abaya. That was Rashi's best way of describing him. Which Rava? Yeah, no Rava. The Abaya for Rava. But either way, so Rabbi Abba said, "Go tell the son of Rabbi Yosef bar Chama that he has to pay the value of the shar lemare." Why? Because he made a wrong psak. And being that he made a wrong psak, it was okay, so therefore he has to come out of pocket. Mar, the son of Ravina said, I'm going to ask Akasha. abam kasha tufta, and I'm going to ask it to the soine of Rava. Now, really, he was asking the kasha to Rava or on Rava, but he didn't want to say he's asking the kasha on Rava, so he said he's asking the kasha on the soine of Rava. Now, what's the big deal? Now let's ask a kasha, kachi darka shel Torah, right? Every time Rava says something, Abaya has an opinion that's not like that. I'm going to ask a kasha, but I'm not asking it to Rava, I'm asking it on the soine of Rava. So Rashi says it's because we're going to see the kasha is going to be a little disrespectful. And it's for that reason he didn't even want to say that I'm channeling the kasha directly to Rava. Euphemistically, he said I'm asking to the soine of Rava. So what's the kasha? It's from a brisa. This brisa is a Tosefta in a bunch of places. If you take a look at the Maseres Hashas, the halacha is always like Beisil. Stating that if somebody wants to go like Beishamai, he could. If you want to go like Beisil, you could. So interesting, right? The halacha is always like Beisil, stating that if you don't want to follow the halacha, I won't tell if you don't tell. So the Gemara is going to ask that obvious stira minei ubei. But first, we finish the brisa. What if somebody says, I like being mekel, so I'm going to paskin like all the kulas of Beis Shammai and all the kulas of Beisil. So the brisa says Rasha. That person's a Rasha. If somebody goes and he says, I'm going to take on the chum Beis Shammai, chum Beisil, all of Akasav is regarding him that the pasuk says, Haksil, the fool, he walks in darkness. Meaning, to always be a machmer, you're a fool. Right? To always be a mekel, you're a Rasha. To always be a machmer, you're a fool. So again, a Rasha maybe is worse than a fool, but a fool is a close second. Either way, says the Brisa that you can go like Beis Shammai, you can go like Beis Hillel, despite the fact that the halacha is like Beis Hillel. But if you can always be machmer, you're a fool, and if you can always be mekel, you're a rush. So what should you do? Iki Beis Shammai ki kuleim ukichamreim, iki Beis Hillel ki kuleim ukuchamreim. So before the kasha, let's just finish the Brisa. How go for kasha? Gemara says, you tell me that halacha is always like Basil. And then you tell me that if you want to go like Bisham, you can go like Bisham. If the halacha is like Basil, then you have to go like Basil. The Gemara says like Kasha, two Terusim. Number one, Kan Koidim Baskel, Kan Loicha Baskel. We know the Gemara says in Erevin Daf Yud Gimel and in other places that Bisham and Basil, they argued for 2.5 years. They said the halacha is like us, they said the halacha is like us. Until the Baskel came and was Machriya, the Elu ve'elu Divelikim Chayim, the halacha ki Basil. So before the Baskel came out, you were able to pick and choose. You want to be a Shamayid, be a Shamayid. You want to be a Hiliyid, be a Hiliyid. And that was when we said, go like Bishamai kichumreim kukuleim, go like Basil kukuleim kukuleim. The halacha k'divrei Yisrael is talking about Baskel. So it's an interesting brayso. Like the halacha k'divrei Yisrael post the Baskel. That's referring to pre the Baskel. Or you could say that you don't have to chop this brayso with a sakina charifa from a chronological perspective, but rather you could say that the entire brayso is after achar Baskel, meaning even the latter part of the brayso that says if you want to pick Bisham Basil, it could be talking about Lachar Baskel. Rabbi Shui Damei Mashkichem the Baskel. And the stira in the Brisa will be reconciled by saying it's two different shitas. The shita that says Lo'il Malachah Kid Basil, that's the man that holds Mashkichem the Baskel. And the shita that says that Haroitz Alasois, that's going Liba the Rabbi Yeshua, whose shita throughout Shas is Ein Mashkichem the Baskel. But the Gemara says bottom line, literally Mikol Makom. That means bottom line in English. Kasha. At the end of the day, it's a kasha. So my brother Ravina said, I'm going to ask a kasha klapi the sign of Rav. And the kasha is from a Mefurshat Tosefta that repeats itself several times in Shas. And that is that even in the world where it was okay to go like Beisham Basil, you were able to pick and choose, but to go always l'chumra, always l'kula, that was not okay. To always go l'kula Rasha, and to always go l'chumra Kisil. Now, Rashi says that if you take a look at the Gemara in Erevin Daf Zayin, which is one of the places that this is mentioned in Shas, the Gemara there clarifies that when the Brisa says that if you're going to always go l'chumra, you're going to be considered Iksil, it doesn't mean that I can't be machmer like Beis Shammai and Beis Shanol the Yontif, and then be maker like Basil when it comes to some other area in halacha, right? There's that you're allowed to do. I'm not meshubit to say every single thing I do is Shammai or every single thing I do is Hill. But within one machlokes, to the extent there's a manifestation of Chumrah and Kula, there if I pick the Chumrah or the Kula, I'll zen them our fool, I'll zen them our Rasha, that's when this Bryce is playing itself out. Where it's one machlokes, it's a tainid marbrei de Ravina, l'chayra, what Rava Paskin, when he said I'm going to impose the Chumrah of Rav and the Chumrah of Shmuel, was mamish what the fool of that brisa did. Because he went ahead and he took one machlokes, and that is turbitz haveshet. Do we look at it as veshet, or do we not look at it as veshet? And in that same one shaila, he went l'chumra, like Rav, that we're going to look at it as veshet. Hence, a neked b'mashu is going to render it a treifa. But in that same exact shaila, he went l'kula like Shmuel, and said it's not going to be a makam shchita. That's mamish what the fool is doing in that brisa. So my brother Ravina said, I don't even want to ask this kasha to Rava. This is the Rashi. I don't even want to ask it to Rava because I feel like I'm being choshed Rava, being a ksil, and Rava is the genius of Shas. The halacha is always like, of course, I'm never going to do that, but at the same time, I don't know. What am I supposed to do? So euphemistically, I'm going to bomb away, and that is to take one machlekes that has a nafkamina lechumra and a nafkamina lekula, and to go lechumra on the beid and nafkaminas, to say that the turbitz haveshet is a veshet in hilchis treifus, but it's not a veshet in hilchis shchita. How can you do something like that? I'll just explain this a drop better because that will segue into the answer. And that is, the whole yesod of the kasha is because really these two nafkaminas in the turbitz haveshet, whether a nekeb mashu makes it into a treifa, and whether or not it's a makam shchita, is really one and the same. It's the same exact shayla. If you look at the turbitz haveshet as the veshet, then nekeb mashu makes it into a treifa, and it would be a makam shchita. If you don't look at it as the veshet, well then it would have to be nifsak berubai, and then it wouldn't be a makam shchita. The two shaylas were totally zebazeh. Now how do you know the two shaylas were totally zebazeh? The Gemara said it. Itmar turbitz haveshet. Rav amar b'mashu, Shmuel amar berubai. Rav amar b'mashu, makam shchita. Shmuel amar berubai, Rav makam shchita. So these two things are totally zebazeh. So to have your cake and eat it too in such a machlokes, which is exactly why Mar Brei Ravina is so disturbed, and that's why he doesn't even want to ask the kasha to Rava. But Rav himself, I don't even want to ask that. Either way, okay, so we have a bomb kasha, right? We come out kasha. So the Gemara, Amar Rav Tavus. So Rav Tavus said, Kula kerav avda. You have to say that we had a misunderstanding of what Rava's psak was. And when Rava paskin l'chumra, he wasn't taking chumra de Rav and chumra de Shmuel, because that the fool does. But rather what he was doing is he was paskening 100% like Rav. He was paskening like Rav through and through. What does that mean? Because when Rami Bar Yecheskel came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Amari said, don't listen to all the klalim that my brother Yehuda said in the name of Rav. So Rami Bar Yecheskel is the famous Rav Yehuda's brother, right? Who's brother Yehuda? It's Rav Yehuda, who's a Talmud Muvik of Rav, and later becomes a Talmud Muvik of Shmuel. And as it relates to this exact halacha, Rav's Shita in Turbitz Haveshet, Rami Bar Yecheskel said, don't listen to what my brother Yehuda said. Because Hachi Amar Rav, let me tell you what Rav really said. Veshet nasnu by chachamim shir. Rav said that the Veshet has a shir. And Tosfos says, the Lashon of shir means a shir l'mayla and a shir l'mata of where you're allowed to do the shchita. Well, if that's the case, if Rav said there's a shir l'mayla in terms of makam shchita when it comes to the Veshet, meaning, going back to the Sugyan Daf Yud Ches and Daf Yud Tes, that quadrant, the upper limit of the Veshet, there is a makam of Hagrama. Well, Mechal, the Turbitz HaVeshet, makam Shchitu. And what's the area then not? It must be, it's the Turbitz HaVeshet. V'kama b'mashu, l'maylo. And he said b'mashu, which means that the halacha of b'mashu is not related to the fact that it's a makam hashchita, and if it's not related to the fact that it's a makam hashchita, so really these two shaylas are not tali zebazeh, and Rav's psak is 100% taliba de Rav. In other words, we thought that the whole yesod of Shitas Rav, that Turbitz Havesh and Nekeb and Mashu would make it into a treif, is because he held it's a makam hashchita. And you know why we thought it? Because the Gemara said it. But Rami Bar Yecheskel said that what the Gemara said is a toys. He said, because you want to know who's saying over that tradition, it's my brother Yehuda, and don't listen to my brother Yehuda, because he gets it wrong sometimes. Don't listen to my brother's brotherly love. Don't listen to what my brother said. But rather, I want to tell you what I heard from Rav. And my Messiah from Rav is a much better Messiah. Hachi Amar Rav. Rav said, Turbitz HaVeshet, or the Veshet has a shear. And if the Veshet has a shear, it means L'maylo L'mata, and it must be the shear L'maylo is the Turbitz HaVeshet. That means the Turbitz HaVeshet is not a Makom Shchita. Okay, so then what did Rav mean when Rav said that a Nekeb and Mashu in the Turbitz HaVeshet would make it into a Treifa? He must have meant that even though it's not the Makom Shchita, it's for veshet with regards to treifa. Das heißt, it's veshet klapi treifa. It's not veshet klapi shchita. He's detailing whether it has a teras veshet in ilchas treifas versus ilchas shchita. Not like what the Gemara thought lechatchila, that it's so pashit that the two things should be totally zebazed. They should be l'shita sayu. The bottom line is, if even according to Rav, the turbetz haveshet is not a makom shchita, so it's pashit why Rav said what he said. Because as soon as you go ahead and you cut the turbetz haveshet b'mashu, at that point in the world of Rav, you're making it into a treifa. It's not a shchita. Hence, it's not a nekev machma shchita. It's a treifa. It became a treifa a second before you started the shchita. You were so close, yet you're so far, and it's for that reason it's not going to be okay. That means the yisoid of shitas Rava, his psak in this Turah de Rababa, was not based on Chumra de Rav, Chumra de Shmuel, but rather it was 100% based on the halacha of Rav, because even Rav only said his halacha with regards to treifas. He never said his halacha with regards to shchita. So just to circle back for a minute, and that is that. So what emerges is, when we saw the machlokes lechatchila between Rav and Shmuel and turbetz haveshet, we got very excited because we said that really this machlokes has ramifications in the first parak, daf yutes, daf yutes, and the sugis of agrama. That's true in the world of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, but Rami Bar Yecheskel held not that way. He held that there is a concept of hagrama when it comes to the veshet lemaila, and in fact that area of hagrama is the turbas of veshet, and there's no machlokes Rav and Shmuel with regards to that. They both hold turbas of veshet. Now the shaila what turbas of veshet is, for that see the beginning of the daf, three shitas. But this machlokes is very much an elu treifas dig machlokes. This is very much not an hakol sheichten dig machlokes. One other just interesting factoid that Rashi speaks out that's worth mentioning. There's a few of them scattered in today's daf, and that is what Rami Bar Yecheskel say. Don't listen to what my brother Yehuda said. Well, what did Rami Bar Yecheskel's brother Yehuda say? That when Rav said turbetz haveshet b'mashu, it's because he holds a makom shchita. If you go back to the beginning of the Gemara, Itmar turbetz haveshet Rav amar b'mashu, Shmuel amar berubai, Rav amar b'mashu makom shchita, v'Shmuel amar berubai lav makom shchita hu. Rav Yehuda didn't say anything. Where did Rabbi Yehuda get involved? So Rashi says that you see from here that any time the Gemara said something over in the name of Rav, a beer in Rav, and we don't know who said it, it's always Rabbi Yehuda. So Stam Rav is Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, and it's for that reason Rami Bar Yecheskel comes and says, "Don't listen to my brother." My brother didn't say anything. Yes, he did, because that beer in Rav is coming from Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, and that's where Rabbi Yehuda gets involved. Either way, so we now know that Rav said, Veshet nasnu by chachamim shir. There's a shir of what part of the Veshet you're allowed to shecht, what not. The Gemara is going to want to know what that shir is. Says the Gemara, L'mayla ad kama, how high up are you allowed to go? I mean, what is that shir? Rav Nachman said, ad kidei tfisas yad. It's up until tfisas yad. Now it's interesting because we had the turbetz haveshet as being a three-way machlokes, right? But it seems like even in Rav's shir, what the Gemara is saying is, it's not necessarily the whole turbetz haveshet that's going to be out of play. But the shir is more specifically, it's ad kedei tfisas yad. Rashi says an interesting definition to tfisas yad. He said it's either 3 etzbais or 4 etzbais, right? So is it 3 or 4? That's what Rashi says, either 3 or 4. Lamata ad kama, is there a shir lamata? And if yes, how far low? Rav Nachman said, Rabbi Baravua said, ad kedei sheyaser. And until it starts getting hairy. Now the Gemara now assumes that ad kedei sheyaser means that if you follow the veshen all the way down to the bottom, into the digestive tract, into what's called the keres hapnimi, so as soon as you get to the keres hapnimi, it's going to start getting hairy. So that's where the veshet meets the keres. That's the keres. Obviously, if you shach the keres, it's not going to be okay. So what is the shir lamata? It sounds like there is no shir lamata. It's all the way down to the bottom, ad kedei sheyas. But the Gemara has a kash on this. Ravina geniva mishmei de Rav. Ravina said in the name of the infamous geniva, who said in the name of Rav, tefach beveshet samuch likeres zehu keres hapnimi, that the last tefach of the veshet, where the veshet meets the keres, that's what's known as the keres hapnimi. Now the keres hapnimi has a unique place in Allah and Ilchas Treifas. The Mishnah says neked b'mashu, but the point is where it's negeya to know what the keres hapnimi is. It's that last tefach. Now that area is not hairy. So what's the kasha? The kasha is if you're allowed to shech the veshet all the way until it gets hairy, then it means you're allowed to shecht on that last tefach as well. So you'll tell me, okay, that last tefach is the veshet. Okay, where it gets hairy, that's when you know you're in the keres already. But it's a mefurish Rav. Rav himself said this. Tefach beveshet samach lekeres is the keres haprimi. You can't check in the keres haprimi, so these two Ravs don't shtim. Right? Amai, let's see it inside. Ki kashach bekeres kashachit. So the Gemara, you have to edit it. Ema tefach bekeres samach leveshet zeh keres haprimi. When we say it's the tefach, it's not the tefach above the keres. It's not the last tefach of the veshet. It's the first tefach of the keres. So that part of the keres, which you know by the sar, you know by the ear, that's what's known as the keres haprimi, as opposed to the rest of the keres. And again, nafkamina in Ilchas Trevis. Iba is saying, or you can answer a little bit differently. Ki kama Rav betura de maser tve. When Rav said that it's ad kadesha yaser, so he was talking about a shar which has a lot of hair. What's the point? Because the shar has a lot of hair, the hair extends up until the veshet. So enochinami, the last tefach of the veshet is considered keres, and because it's considered keres, you're not allowed to do a shchita. Rav said that there's a shir, and what's the shir? Lamata tzad kadesha yaser. That sounds like you can go all the way down to the keres. The teretz is no. Rav said that regarding a shar. The mitzias of the shar is different. The mitzias is that last tefach has here, and because that last tefach has here, so therefore, essentially, when Rav says you can go ad kadesha yaser, he's actually telling you can't shecht on that bottom tefach. The bottom line is you can't shecht on the bottom tefach of the veshet. If that's the case, how can you tell me kadesha yaser? That bottom tefach doesn't have here. Incorrect. By a shar, it does have here, and that's why I call Yavai el mekoymei b'shalom. Another halacha related to the turbas haveshet. Amar Rav Nachman, Nachman said the name of turbas haveshet. The turbas haveshet shenital kulam milechi that was completely dislodged from the lechi. So we mentioned that the veshet on the top attaches itself to the lechi, to the jawbone. So what if the turbas haveshet, which is the top part of the veshet, it dislodges from the lechi? What's the halacha? So Rav Nachman, in the name of Shmuel, said kosher. It's going to be kosher. And he continued. He said, kosher. The Mishnah said that if you remove the entire lechi, it's going to be kosher. Now, if you're going to remove the lechi, obviously the turbas haveshet is going to be dislodged from the lechi. Because if there's no lechi, then there's no lechi for the turbas haveshet to be attached to. So that's a raya that doesn't bother me that the turbas haveshet that was nittel from the lechi is going to be okay. So again, Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel says a chiddush. If the turbas haveshet was completely dislodged from the lechi, it's still going to be kosher. He said that before a shiraya, because the Mishnah says nittel lechi atachtin is kosher, and b'chal masayim mana, if it's not there, it can't be attached to it. But the Gemara says maskef Rav Papa. Rav Papa asked him a kasha. How could you say that? How could you tell me that if you dislodge the lechi from the veshet, it's going to be okay? Ikar simanim. We know one of the 5 halachas that should be seen at the government hilchas shchita is ikor, right? You have to make sure that the simanim are not nekar. You have to sever it, but you can't detach it. L'chura, what does detach it mean? It means the kan and the veshet are attached to something, and if you detach it, it's a problem. L'mayla, the veshet is attached to what? It's attached to the lechi. So how could Rav Nachman say in the name of Shmuel, turbas haveshet shenitol kulam lechi is going to be kosher? It's ikor. Just explain the kasha. It's not just a treifa. It would even be shchitasa nevela. It would be metama b'masa, because you can't do a kosher shchita once it was already nekar. Nekar trips you up in the chefts of the shchita. So Rav Papa asked Rabam Kash. Rav Papa Kash masni. Rav Papa, it's very nice kasha. But l'chur Shmuel has mefurish right. You see, nitol lechi atachtin is kosher. So if it's kosher, it's kosher. Says right. Says the Gemara. No, bishlei masni Rav Papa like kash. It's not a kash. I'll tell you why. Because ha di yakari uke ha di igum igume. This is a little bit tricky. When the Mishnah says that nitol lechi atachtin is kosher, it could be, let's go backwards, it's talking about where it's igum egumi. It's talking about where the jawbone was removed, but the basar that the lechi is attached to is still there. So somebody literally did a surgery where he removed the lechi, the actual bone, but the basar that's to the outside of the bone, that is attached to the turbas haveshet, that remained there. So you removed the lechi, you removed the chefts of the bone, the neshama of that aver was taken away. But it's still attached to it because the basar, where it's all ma'ura, where it's all mixed up with the gidin and all that stuff, that's all there. And because that's still there, so it's going to be okay. But the problem is, when Shmuel said, Turbitz haveshet shenitel kulam milachi kosher, hadi akiriur. ikuri. That was where you literally removed it, which means it's not attached at all. So Rav Papa says, in the Mishnah, you see that I don't need the lechi, I don't need the bone there. That's going to be okay. But maybe that's when you surgically remove it, leaving the turbetz haveshet attached al kapanim to the basar. Where, in the words of Chazal, you were an igum igumi. But it could be if you were an akir urinat. And that's what Shmuel is talking about. He's talking about an akir ikuri, right? Right? That's a continuation of igum igmuni. He said he did it on top of the siman, but the siman is still attached. Ella zok the Gemara Shmuel kasha, but according to Shmuel it is shver. So Rav Papa is not shver, because Rav Papa you could always be miyashiv the Mishnah, but Shmuel is shver, because at the end of the day, if Shmuel's understanding nitol lechi atachten kasha means that you can remove it legamri, and that's his raya that turbetz haveshet shenitol kulam milachi is going to be kosher. L'chayra, why is that not ikur? So the Gemara says you have to say loy tema kuloi ela ema ruba. You're right. You have to do a little bit of an edit, and you have to say that Shmuel never said turbetz haveshet shenitol kulam milachi kosher. You have to say that he meant rubai. If that's the case, what about the v'tana tuna? Right, v'tana tuna, he had a raya from the Mishnah. You didn't just say Allah, he had a raya from the Mishnah. And you're going to tell me he learned the Mishnah the way Rav Papa learned the Mishnah? That the boss is still in, then it's not a raya. So why is it bringing a raya? So the Mefarshim speak out, you have to say that Enochi Nami, the way the Gemara understands Shmuel now, the whole V'tana Tuna never really happened. Right? The Gemara was injecting this V'tana Tuna, thinking that Shmuel meant Kulai. But now the Rav Papa allowed us to understand this a little bit better, so it's clear that he didn't mean kula, he meant rubai, and if that's the case, there's no way the Mishnah is even going to be a raya, because the Mishnah is going to be talking about where it was igum igumemi ilu simon. Either way, says the Gemara, that's going to be the teretz. But the Gemara still has a kasha. Rabbi Chana sent the name of Shmuel. Again, it's the same Shmuel. Simonim shenedal beruben treifa. That if you have a simon where roiv of it was already detached, so it's hanging on literally for dear life, pun intended. So the halach is it's going to be considered a treifa. So vaita there should be a problem. Rav Sheshet Brei Ravidi had the ikpuli hasam or ha the ifrik ifruki, that there's two types of situations where it was detached beroiv. Rashi says that if it was detached beroiv in a way where it was detached neatly, so you took off neatly, like surgically you removed it, so then the little bit of meat that's still there could be kosher. And that's what Shmuel meant when he said turbetz haveshet shenitel, not kuloi, but rubai melechi is going to be kosher because the little bit that's there is in a good place. When Shmuel said that it's going to be a treifa, he was talking about, Rashi says, where he tore it out. Kedavar haneker bekoyach, sheneker kan ma'at, v'kan ma'at ad rubai. The oisem miyat ha'mechuber ena mechuber b'yachad. Hilkov la'chibaru, the loy ha'davari, it's not going to regenerate in that situation, and it's really not going to be. Oh, okay, either way, what was the sikum of this last part of the daf? So Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, another halacha related to turbetz haveshet. Again, the topic of the overwhelming majority of the daf was the turbetz haveshet. A neke b'mashu, or does it have to be beroiv? It is a makom shchita. It's not a makom shchita. What is the turbetz haveshet? Three definitions of what exactly it might be. Right? Nafkamin is whether there's hagrama l'mayla on the veshet or there's no hagrama l'mayla on the veshet. But this last halacha related to the turbetz haveshet was what Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, and that is turbetz haveshet shenitel kuloi milechi kosher. That if you remove it 100%, it's going to be kosher. But after further review, what emerged is that if you remove it 100%, it's not going to be kosher. That's ikor. So now it's going to be a treif. It's even going to be an avail, it's going to be a time of a masa, number one. Number two, you have to say it's talking about where it was only nekar rubai. But even where it was nekar rubai, the only time it's going to be kosher if it was ikval ikpuli, it was removed surgically. So at least the meat that it's holding on to is stark, it's strong. If, however, it was ifra kifruki, it was torn apart where it's mechuber ma'at kan, ze'er sham, that array is not considered a proper chibur, and in that situation, it's going. One of the things that came out of this discussion was, how do you learn the Mishnah? When the Mishnah says nitalechi atachten kosher, what's the taich of nitalechi atachten? When the Gemara introduced Shmuel Chatchila, the Gemara brought it with a v'tana tuna, which always means I have a raya from the Mishnah, a raya from nitalechi atachten, that it means that the lechi is completely gone, which means that the veshet is completely dislodged. And the kana also, by the way, it's completely dislodged. And that was faket, that was the raya to the Gemara's initial understanding of Shmuel, that nitalechi atachten. And even if it was kuloi, it's still going to be kosher. But Rav Papa proved that can't be pshat in the Mishnah. So what emerged l'maskana as it relates to pshat in the Mishnah is that the only time nitalechi atachten is going to be kosher is if it's igum igume mi ilui simanim. It would have to be where the bone was removed, but the basar and that samis and the gid and everything that's on the outside of the lechi would still be intact and attached, that's enough to say that it's not going to be good. You don't need the lechi to maintain the status of it not being considered nekar. What you need is the basar and everything outside of the lechi, and as long as you have that in and of itself is going to be okay. Either way, this concludes the turbetz haveshet, and really the veshet part of today's daf. We now turn our attention to the counterpart, and that is the gargeres, also known as the kana, also known as the trachea. So the Mishnah said, "Upsukas hagargeres." Psukas hagargeres is also considered a treifa, and how much would it have to be nifsak? It would have to be nifsak roif. Ad kedei kach, this idea is that we had how many times already in Chulin? Can't count. That if you would have an animal that was already chatzi kana pagam, and all you did did a tiny bit of a shchita to put it over the top, that would already be considered a shchita, because psukas hagargeres, if you have a veshet, the only time it's good, it has to be in pristine condition, because a nekev, even the size of a mashahu, would already render it into a problem. But the gargeres, very, very, very different. Either way, the Gemara now is going to bring a discussion of how much psukas hagargeres needs to be. I mean, we just gave it away. We gave it away the entire Masechta. We know it's a roif, but the chiddush over here is going to be how you define the roif. Says the Gemara Tana. We learned in the Brisa. Kama psukas hagargeres beruba. It's roif. Kama ruba. So for that we don't have a Brisa already. But for that we have the next best thing. We have Rav. Rav said roif oivya. It's roif of the thickness. Va'amrila, and some said that what Rav said was roif chalal. So it was a shayla what exactly Rav said, but it's either roif avya or it's roif chalala. Now, what is roif avya and what is roif chalala? So it's very simple. The definition of psukas hagargeres means that the thickness, right? So just think of the gargeres as the straw. So you're chopping the straw in half, right? You're just cutting through the thickness, not that thick. You're cutting through the thickness of the straw. Once you get to the midway point and you go a little bit above that, that's when it's considered psukas hagargeres. The shaila is, do you take the thickness of the gargeres into account, or do you not take the thickness of the gargeres into account? The reason this chaps an afkamina, because the gargeres is much thicker on one side than it is on the other side, which means that if you start cutting from the thicker side, you're going to get to the midway point much quicker if you're going to take the thickness of the gargeres into account. If you don't take the thickness of it into account, but you just look at the hollow part, the inside part of the straw, well then the roif chalala is always going to be the roif chalala. Doesn't matter if you're coming from this side, doesn't matter if you're coming from that side. So again, let's assume that the gargeres with the hollow part of it is 8 centimeters and round, right? That's what the circumference is. And if you take the thickness into account, so it's now going to be 10 centimeters. But here's the point. Of the extra 2 centimeters, 90% of it is going to be on one side. So if the cheshbon of the midway point is you have to get to the roiv of the 8, you have to get to 4.1. So that's going to be one calculation. If, however, it's 5.1, then it's going to be another calculation, and the 5.1 is going to be much closer to the side that you're cutting from than the 4.1, because that the extra 2 is very much weighted more on one side than it's weighted on the other side. So the bottom line is that's the sikum of the top Rashi on the Amid, but regardless, this was the Shaila. 2 girsais, whether it was Roif Oivya or whether it was Roif Chalal. Says the Gemara, a Maisa Shahya. He psukas hagargeres, the coming to Rab. There was a psukas hagargeres that came to Rab, right? The psukas hagargeres did not walk into Rab, but somebody brought a psukas hagargeres to Rab. Yasnivik habadikla. And Rab sat down like a Rav, and he started being Baidikit. He wanted to see, is it Rav or is it not Rav, right? And he started being Baidikit, B'Rav Oivya, which is one of the Lashonis of what Rav Shita was. Says the Gemara, Amuli, Rav Kana Ravasi, the Ravs, Rav Kana Ravasi, they were 2 Talmidim Muvhakim of Rav. They said, Limadatonu Rabbeinu B'Rav Chalala. Didn't you teach us that it's B'Rav Chalala? It's not supposed to be B'Rav Avya. So the Gemara said when Rav heard that, he didn't want to pass anymore. He said, you know something? He didn't want to pass. So what did he do first? He was Badakla B'Roiv Avya. But then he chapped that, you know something, maybe it's not Roiv Avya, maybe it's Roiv Chalala. At just one point, Roiv Avya is a chumrah over Roiv Chalala. Because usually the shochet starts shechting from the thicker part, which means that if you cheshbon the Roiv Avya, you're going to get to Roiv before you're going to get to Rav of Rav Chalal. So Rav started off going l'chumra, and then they told him, Rebbe, why are you going so much l'chumra? Limadatanu Rabbeinu b'Rav Chalala. And when he heard that, he says, you know something? Yes, I don't know. I'm not being machmer. I'm also not going to be mekel. So what did Rav do? Shadri l'kamid the Rabbe bar Parchana. Wow. So like who does the Rebbe go to? With a kvittel. So who did Rav send his shaila to? He sent the shaila to Rabbe bar Parchana. And the Gemara says, Batka b'Rav Chalala. So Rabbe Parchana went. He was mekel. He was baidik b'Rav Chalala. The achshira. He said this animal is kosher. And now did he say it's kosher? V'zava mina b'tleisis stiri pshiti bisra. He bought meat for the whole mishpacha. He went ahead, 13 coins of meat. He went ahead and bought. This is the Ma'is Shayikachaya. Now, from here until where our daf is going to end, we're going to learn about 20 lines of Gemara now. The Gemara is going to ask 3 stories on this story. So, you ever heard of a kasha famasa? We're going to ask 3 kashas, and each one's a bomb kasha. Each one's like a whole shas sugya. Says the word kasha number 1. How was Rabbi Chana able to opine? No less lakula on this halacha. For Hatanya, we learned to the Brayso Chacham Shetime, a Chacham that says Tame Ein Chaver Rasha Lutar, Schav is not allowed to be Matar. Asar, if a Dayan said something's Asar Ein Chaver Rasha Lahater. So Rav over here started off, and he was Boyadik B'Rav Avya, which means Rav is paskening l'chumra. So how could Rabbi Bar Chana go keneged the psak of Rav? That's a little different because Rav sent him the shaila, right? But Afal Pika, it doesn't matter. If Rav paskin one way, l'chumra, how does Rabbi Bar Chana have a right to paskin l'kula? Nachama. Rav Avya is a chumra, Rav Chalal is a kula. Rav started off Rav Avya, the Talmidim told him no. So he says, no problem, I sent Rabbi Chana, he came out l'kula. So now he's allowed to do that. So the Gemara says, Shani hacha, the Rav le asa mesa. Rav never really, he was being baidik, but he never paskin. He didn't put up a pashkevillin and say, do not eat from this animal. He just started being baidik. But he was loy asar meisar, and for that reason, this didn't violate that principle. The Gemara asks another kasha. This behema obviously had a shaila. Right? What was the shaila? The shaila was it a psukas hagageres? Was it not a psukas hagageres? And even the hachra was this very nuanced hachra. How do you define Rav? Is it Rav Avya? Or is it Rav Chalal? But it needed a shaila, right? Shainemo. Rav himself didn't even know how to paskin. So of course, this is something that required sheilas chacham. Well, if that's the case, how did Rabbi Bar Chana, how did the great Rabbi Bar Chana ate from this? The pasuk says, he said, Hashem Elokim hine nafsh leim tuma unevelo chevelo yichadim nervad atav sar pigel bipi. Now, if this pasuk sounds familiar, it better, because we had this a week ago on Daf Lamed Zayin, and the Gemara says like this: Hine nafshi leim tuma. What did Yecheskel Navi mean when he said my nefesh is not tamei? Shloi harti bayoyim. I didn't have machshavas harayis during the day, which would have led to tuma b'night. So hine nafshi leim tuma from tumas keri. Unevel b'treifel lo yechalti. What did he mean by that? He didn't mean that he didn't eat nevelos and treifus, because that's obvious. What he meant was shlo yechalti basar kois me'olam. I never ate from a behema misukenes. Right? See the previous parak. This was the that a behema mesukenes is mutter, because from the fact that Yecheskel Navi is being meshabech himself that he didn't eat from a behema mesukenes v'aisas meikra, then it's going to be mutter. What do you mean from that? He didn't mean that he didn't eat pigel of zvachim and menachas fame. What he meant was that he never ate from any piece of meat that required sheilas chacham. Sure, that's a number of different shots. I never ate from a behemoth, even though Yecheskel was a kohen, but he never ate from a behemoth. He didn't give the zraya, the lechayayim, and the cave. But what's the bottom line? You see from here that Yecheskel Hanavi hat sich barimt. He said that, I never ate from an animal that required sheilas chacham. Well, if Yecheskel Hanavi did that, and he's telling you he did that, he's telling it to you, he's giving you advice that if you're a great man, you should follow this advice exactly the way I'm presenting it. Well, Rabbi Chana was a great man, the great Rabbi Bar Chana. So, right, so if that's the case, how could Rabbi Bar Chana go ahead and eat from this animal? You see it required sheilas chacham, right? Rab himself wasn't sure, and if it required a sheilas chacham, so Rabbi Bar Chana l'chayr is violating the chumra of Yecheskel Hanavi. How was he able to do that? So the Gemara says, not a kasha, because the only time you have to be machmer in these things is if a chacham paskins based on svara. Rabbi Bar Chana agmare samach. He had a Messiah. What was his Messiah? That Rav means Rav Avya, which is lekula, and that's why he was able to paskin Rav Chalal, which is lekula, and that's why he was able to paskin the way that he paskin. But the bottom line is that being that Rabbi Bar Bachana was not paskening me svara. He was paskening based on Meseira. This halacha doesn't apply. Avada, if someone asks a shayla to a chacham, the chacham knows a psak halacha. There's no reason to be machmir. Where your machmir is where it's a svara. Why? Because then you start getting a little paranoid. And you start wondering, maybe the svara is not such a good svara, so Yari Shemayim should be nizir from it. But if it's a mafurish, Rabbi Bachana heard from his Rebbe, so what's the shayla? There's nothing to be worried about. The Gemara has a third problem. The Gemara said, the tape of glay, mishum chshada. Rabbi Bar Bachana paskins that it's okay, and the next thing you know, Rabbi Bachana has dinner for a month. It's not so simple. Why are you not worried about chshad? What's the chshad? The Tanya belonging to the Brayse. Don't asadin. If a Tanya paskin the shayla zika, v'chayiv, timei, v'tiher, asar, v'hitter. Right, this pretty much covers every option. V'chein ha'edim shehi idu kulon rasha in likach. So whether it's the dying, regardless of what he paskin, or it's an aid that said Edis regardless of what he said Edis. So the halach is, if you want to now go and buy the thing, let's say that you said is tahar, that's kosher, you're allowed to do it. Stating that, the rabbi said, don't do anything that's like this or that even rhymes like this. Don't do anything that's synonymous with this. Stay far away from things like this. You know why? Because there's an inyan, there's an inyan of chshat. So what's the kasha? Rabbi Bar Bachana gets this piece of meat that comes his way. This is like a shmaka piece of meat. He looks at it and he says, kosher. Oh, and by the way, I'd like some. It doesn't look good. It looks a little bit. Now, of course, no one's being choshed. Right? In the previous Gemara, Rabbi Bachana is the great Rabbi Bachana. Now, all of a sudden, we're being choshed him. It doesn't make sense. Now, the teretz is the halach of chshad. The yisim nikiyim. So, if that's the case, how could Rabbi Bachana do that? So, the Gemara says it's not a kasha. Because Hani Mili, you want to know when that halacha was said? That's midi demazbin mishuma. That's when you're going to buy something based on an assessment. We're a little bit concerned that maybe, there was like a sheikhat here almost, because it looks a little bit like what happened was Rabbi Bar Bachana, right, let's just use this as an example, said it's kosher, wink, wink, and then when he bought it, he got a good deal. Whenever there's muckim to declare that that's what happened, that's when you get concerned. But if you're paying fair market value for it anyways, then what's the concern? Meaning, even that infamous guy that we spoke about the other day, who's always being choshed at everybody, l'ra, right? He's minding everybody else's business. He's mamish. He's muchter b'chol mida meguna sheba'olam. That guy, right? Who we takes up a lot of space in Shas. But that guy, even him, there has to be some rationale. There has to be some methodology to what his madness is. So the point is, if you could assume that Rabbi Bar Bachana or whoever that rabbi is would have gotten a good deal, so that's what the chshad is. It looks a little sheikhadid. And I'll say your animal is kosher, you give it to me 50% off. Done. But to the extent you're paying fair market value, it's not going to be an issue. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Bachana bought meat. Meat was sold by its weight. You know what the weight is. There's a fixed price, right? There's a commodity market, and you know exactly what it's supposed to go for. And as a result, the maskala was muchach that he didn't get a good deal, and therefore you don't have to be worried about chshad. In fact, the Gemara says there's already a precedent to this. What's the precedent? Ki had the rabba, or some have the girsa rava sharat trifta. He was once matter a treifa, v'zava min abisra, and then he went ahead and he bought a basar. Amar Bas Rav Chizda. So Bas Rav Chizda told him. Now it makes more sense. It would be Rava because Bas Rav Chizda was Rava's wife. If it's Rabba, so Bas Rav Chizda is telling her husband's Rebbe. I hear, but the bottom line is, Abba Shari Bukhra, right? My father, right? Don't try this at home. So Bas Rav Chizda turns to her husband. He says, "Come on, my father didn't do this, right? I mean, this is like you hear this in your first chassid shmuz." Abba Shari Bukhra said, "My father, when it was Mata Bechar, he would never buy the basra from a Bechar that he was Mater. So why are you doing this?" Amalah. So Rava knew what to answer. He said, "Hani mili Bukhra da Shuma mizdav." No, Bechar is different because the Bechar, even the meat of a Bechar, was sold on Shuma. And Rashi says the reason it was sold on Shuma because it's actually a halacha. You're not allowed to sell kachim in the regular way, right? Even psuli amikdashim, they used to sell it in a more bakavadig way. So they wouldn't weigh it, they wouldn't measure it. It was sold based on shuma. So pizza was sold based on shuma. So over there, when there's a shuma, then there's a chashash that maybe you are matter and this is some sort of shaycha because you're going to get a good deal in return. But hacha, I'm buying regular meat in the shuk, maskal muchach. The weight of it is muchach. You have nothing to worry about. And Rava continued. He said, I know what you might be thinking. Maybe mishum maybe you're thinking that still I'm going to get a good deal. How am I going to get a good deal? They're going to give me a better piece of meat, right? So sometimes, even if you're willing to pay, you need protection. So, no, I'm willing to pay. I'll pay you the same thing the other guy's willing to pay. Yeah, but I saved the nice pieces for the VIPs, for the shiny Yidden, for the Chushva people. But Rava said that's not an issue because Kol Yoyma Mal Yisazavnuli. I don't need to issue a psak to get a good piece. I'm Rava. I walk into a store, they always give me the best chayra. So there's no chshad over here. Being that there's no chshad, you don't have to worry about. But the bottom line is, this is a maisa that's a raya that supports this idea. And that is that even though it's true, a chacham that's mekel on something is not allowed to go ahead and now benefit from his kula. Because of a chshad, it looks a little bit like it was sheicha, but that's only true if there's takamokim to be chayshish. But to the extent that you're dealing with something fixed, you're dealing with something that you don't really have to worry about, in that instance, it's not going to be okay. So what's the sikum of the last part of the daf? The halachic part of it is that psukas hagargeres. How much is Psukas HaGargeres? That's a Braisa. It's Roiv. What's the definition of Roiv? So Tula Shainis and Rabbi Bar Chana had his Messiah. It's either Roiv Avya, which would be a Kula, because usually the Sheikh checks from the thicker part, or it's a Chumrah, right? You're going to get there sooner. Or Roiv Chalala, which would be the Kula. It's just totally in the inside part of the proverbial straw. It's what the inside is. And the Gemara told the story. The story was that there was a Psukas HaGargeres that walked right into Rav's Bezdin. Rav sat down, he started being Baidik B'Reiv Avya. And they told him, why being Baidik B'Reiv Avya L'chumra? You told us, L'madatanu Rabbeinu, that you could be Mekel. And once Rav heard that, he abstained. He didn't want to pass him. So he sent it to Rabbi Bar Chana, and Rabbi Bar Chana went B'Reiv Chalala, and he was Mekel. And now he was Mekel, he went ahead and he bought from it. And the Gemara had 3 kashas on this story. So again, we brought this story for the Reiv Avya, Reiv Chalala portion, obviously. But the Gemara then had 3 ha'aras on the story. 3 very fundamental shailas that are all rooted in basic halachas of Dayanas. The first shaila was, isn't there a din that once one chacham is machmer, another chacham is not allowed to be mekel? So if Rav thought Rav Avya l'chumra, how could Rabbi Bar Chana go now and say Rav Chalala l'kula? And the teretz is, the Gemara said, that's not shver, and the reason is because Rav never paskin. Rav was never really machmer. He was being baidik l'chumra, but he was never machmer. Because he was never machmer, so it's for that reason that wasn't going to be an issue. The second kasha was, Rabbi Bar Chana bought from it. How do you buy from it? This is a basam et hashayla. Yechezkel Hanavi said he never ate from something that required Hiras Chacham. So why would he have done it? So the Gemara clarifies. That's only if the Hiras is based on a Svara. This was not based on a Svara. And the third shaila is how is Rabbi Chana able to buy from something that he himself paskin? Right, so the first shaila was, had he paskin? Shaila was, had he eat from this? And the third one was, he bought from something he himself paskin? It's a different niggin for all 3 shailas. He himself bought from something that he himself paskin. Isn't there Allah? You shouldn't do that because of Echshad. It looks a little bit like there's some sheikhad business going on over here, and the Gemara says that that's not a kasha, and the reason that's not a kasha is because that's only true to the extent that what you're buying is totally in shuma. But if it has a fixed value, so then everybody sees that's not going to be an issue. And then the Gemara said that we have a Maisa Shahaya Kachaya to support this. The Maisa happened with Bas Rav Chizda, and either Rabba or Rava, either way, that concludes today's daf. First part, the majority of it dealing with the turbitz haveshet, and then the latter part dealing with the gargaris. So as it relates to Ray, just to end with one ara, this is something that we've spoken about so many times over the years, but I just think it's kedai, it's short, and la'inyan, Bezras Hashem, related to today's daf. So the Gemara in the bottom of daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, and it went onto the top of daf Mem Daled Amud Aleph, brought a brisa. A brisa that has its makar in a Tosefta. It's a Tosefta in the second parak of Masechtas Sukkah, second parak of Masechtas Idias, and the first parak of Masechtas Yevama. So it's in 3 places in Tosefta. I'm reading from the Maseres Hashas. The brisa says, "La'olam halacha k'divrei Beis Hillel." The halacha is always like Beis Hillel. V'roitza lasas k'divrei Beis Shammai oisa, k'divrei Beis Hillel oisa. Stating that you shouldn't go mikula Beis Shammai mikula Beis Hillel, because if you do that, you're Rasha, and you shouldn't go michumer Beis Shammai michumer Beis Hillel, because if you do that, you're going to be a ksil. And the Gemara asks the obvious question. The brisa starts, and then you tell me, if the halacha is like Beis Hillel, then if you want to go like Beis Shammai, you shouldn't be allowed to go like Beis Shammai. So which one is it? Is it la'olam halacha k'divrei Beis Hillel, or is it no? Haroitza lasas k'divrei Beis Shammai yoisa. And the Gemara said 2 terutzim. One teretz was when the brisa says la'olam halacha k'divrei Beis Hillel, it's talking about after the baskel that the Gemara talks about in different places was machriya that the halacha is like Beis Hillel, but before the Baskel, when there was no Hachra. So if you wanted to go like Beis Shammai, you can go like Beis Shammai. If you wanted to go like Beis Hillel, you were able to go like Beis Hillel. So the Braisa, even though it looks like it's one long narrative, really is talking about two different times of history. The first part of the Braisa is actually the later part of history, L'achar HaBaskel, and then the next part of the Braisa goes back in time, and that's talking about Kodim HaBaskel. Iba is saying it could be the entire Braisa, the Gemara said, is talking about L'achar HaBaskel. The two parts of the Braisa are two different shittas. The first part of the Braisa is going according to the shittas that hold Mashkichem HaBaskel. The second part of the Braisa is going according to the shitta that holds Ein Mashkichem HaBaskel. Whose shitta is that? That is the sheet of Rabbi Yishua. The Teres Chaim, right here on this Gemara, makes a diak. The Braisa begins Lo Olam Halacha Kedivri Beis Hillel. Right to Teres Chaim. What does it mean Lo Olam Halacha Kedivri Beis Hillel? The halacha is like Beis Hillel. What's this emphasis that the halacha is always like Beis Hillel? There's a lot of kloli apsak that we have in Shas. You don't say the halacha is always like Rabbi Akiva. The halacha is always like Rabbi Yossi and Rebbe. The halacha is always like Rav when it comes to Isuri and Shmuel when it comes to Mamoini. Why does the Braisa preface Lo Olam Halacha Kedivri Beis Hillel? And the Teres Chaim says a davar nifla. Dr. Teres Chaim, the reason we said the word Lo Olam over here is because we paskin like Beis Hillel over Beis Shammai for a reason that's different than why we're usually machriya psak throughout Shas. When we say that halacha is like Rabbi Akiva mechaveiroi, it's because Rabbi Akiva was better in learning than Chaveiroi. When we say that halacha is like Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi, it's because of the koyach of Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi nimukei imoi, right? What is nimukei imoi? He comes with his reasons. He comes bavoffent, right? He comes armed and dangerous. He knows how to win every battle, and it's for that reason that halacha is always like Rabbi Yossi. When we say that halacha is like Rav when it comes to Issa v'Heter and Shmuel when it comes to Dinei Mamonis, it's because Rav was mistaber tfei, says the Teres Chaim in Issa v'Heter, and Shmuel was mistaber tfei in the world of Choshe Mishpat. It's based on the fact that they were better in learning in those areas, or maybe even in all areas. And that's what governs, that's what underpins that psak halacha. It's for that reason, says the Teres Chaim, it's not muchach that the halacha is always going to be like Rav Be'isr and by Shmuel B'Mamoini, and that even the halacha is always going to be like Rabbi Akiva and like Rebbe and like Rabbi Yossi. It's going to be that way unless you're told otherwise. But to say that it's la'olam going to be that way, lav dafka. Because the only reason we paskin like Rav by Isser and like Shmuel B'Mamoini is because it's mistaber tvei. Well, what if you have a machlokes where it's Isser v'Heter and Shmuel svara is mistaber tvei? Or you have a machlokes in Dinei Mamonis and Rav svara is mistaber tvei? Well, then Hadar Dina, you're going to go connected what the regular rule and regulation is, and that's the way you're going to paskin. When it came to the machlokes Bisham and Bisol, what did the Baskel say? You remember? The Baskel said Elu ve'elu divrei lekim chayim, stating that v'alocha k'divrei Beis Hillel, that really Bisham and Bisol in Shamayim they couldn't be machriya. Narvas they said medaf hob and apsak, and the mahalach of the psak is going to be that the halacha is going to be like Beis Hillel. But here's the punchline: the reason says the Teres Chaim we pass like Beis Hillel is not because Shitas Beis Hillel is mistaber tvei. In fact, the Gemara says in the first parak of Masechtas Yevamis that Beis Shammai was mechaded tvei. It was actually just the opposite. But it's because there had to be a hachran. This is what we machri. In fact, the Gemara even says why we machri like Beis Hillel. The Gemara says they were big balei midas. They used to say Shitas Beis Shammai first and their own Shita second. But it had nothing to do with their charifus and nothing to do with their svaris. It was not related to the fact that they're better in learning. If that's the case, there's the Teres Chaim. So there's no way in the world that you could ever go against that klal. What are you going to tell me? I'm learning a machlokes B'Sham Beis Hillel, and I'm a dayan, and I think Shitas Beis Shammai is mistaber tvei. Who cares? The reason we passed like Beis Hillel was never because we thought Shitas Beis Hillel was mistaber tvei. It was always based on the fact that there was a baskel. If it's based on the fact that it's a baskel, there's no way to ever get out of it. And if there's no way to ever get out of it, so based on that, it's going to be la'olam, and that's la'olam halacha k'divrei Beis Hillel. So says the Teres Chaim, when it comes to all other machlokes, and you don't have this preface of la'olam, it's tafka by the machlokes Bisham and Beis Hillel. You know why? It's because of the fact it's mitoich chumra she'echmarta leh b'soifa ikalta leh b'tchilase, or the reverse of that, right? It's because we don't really have a reason to pass like Beis Hillel over Beis Shammai. So if you tell me that halacha is like Beis Hillel, it's always going to be that way. It's dafka with regards to the others, where the reason we're passing it is because they're better. Well, What if now all of a sudden their Bapluk is saying better? Then it could be that the halach would be in the reverse. And that's why, when it comes to Machlokes B'Shaim Beis Hillel, there's no wiggle room. B'Shaim Beis Hillel ain't a Mishnah here. It's not a Geya. It's because it's not based on Svaris. We don't cheshbon it as a Das Yachid. Right? There's so many areas in halacha we don't even reckon with the other Shita. It's because the Basko was Machriya. We're there's two Svaris, and I think this Svara is better than that Svara, but there's a certain Shulchan Aruch of how much credence and credibility I have to give the inferior Svara. But over here, the side of this inferior svara is not, I hear the other svara better. It was rejected based on the Baskel. Rejected based on the Baskel. I'm like, Goyra said, that is the oimik of understanding, says the Teres Chaim, the difference between a Machlokes B'Shaim Beis Hillel and any other Machlokes in Shas. And in one word, this is encapsulated in this Tosefta, la'olam halacha k'divrei Beis Hillel. Not halacha k'divrei Beis Hillel, but la'olam halacha k'divrei Beis Hillel. But the emes is, I think there's another pshat in this word, la'olam halacha k'divrei Beis Hillel. And this is based on a parak in Mesilas Yesharim that we've spoken about many times over the years. It's parak chaf. It's called Mishkal HaChassidus. So one of the madrigas of Rav Pinchas Ben Yair, which is the foundation of the Sefer Mesilas Yesharim, is Chassidus. Right? Chassidus is very much towards the top, depending on what girsa you have in the Brisa Kidduah. There's many different girsais. Chassidus can be the highest madrega, the second to highest, third to highest. It's very, 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 very close to the top. What is a chassid? So a chassid is someone that goes l'fnei mishur sadin. In fact, the Mesilas Yesharim says that a chassid is to mitzvah saseh what the parish is to mitzvah loy saseh. So the parish, we know, is kadosh matzah mechuba mutalach. He doesn't just not eat basar nevela. He doesn't eat basar at all because he doesn't want to even ever come to eating basar. If I eat basar, I'll zicha never eat basar nevela. The chassid is that exact same person, but he's not operating in the world of loy saseh. He's operating in the world of aseh. The parish is in the world of Yira. He has such Yira of the Chet that he makes such Gedarim that he's a Kadosh Atzmach Mutalach. The Chassid is operating in the world of Ahava. He has such Ahavas Hashem that he wants to make sure that he's going to do so much and he'll fulfill the Ratzon HaBayrei even in nuances that the Bayrei never told him he wants him to do, because he understands that if the Eibishter told him to do this, he probably wants me to even do more. But Al Kapanim, the Chassid is the Mitzvah Saseh counterpart of the parish. So Mesilas Yesharim Kedarkai Bakodesh talks a lot about Chassidus, and then he has a whole parak that's called Mishkal Chassidus. And the Mesilas Yesharim says that this idea of Mishkal Chassidus is the hardest part of being a chassid. So what is Mishkal Chassidus and what's so hard about it? It says in Mesilas Yesharim, Mishkal Chassidus is that a chassid has to realize that sometimes to be a chassid and to be machmir is not necessarily the right thing, because you might be taking upon yourself machmer v'tavei alecha bracha in one area, but at that same second, unbeknownst to you, because you didn't make the mishkal properly, you didn't compute this thoroughly enough, you're actually being mezalzel, you're being mekel in another area. And if you do that, yotza schara behefseta. And he says that's why the chassid has to be sheikel as chassidus. Such a profound idea. Every single step he makes to make sure that it's 100% oisgehalten. And he says it's a very hard thing to do. And in fact, it's the most difficult part of Chassidus. So imagine, this is Perik Chaf and Mesilas Yesharim. So you're already holding where you nailed, you conquer, you climb 19 mountains. And you're up to literally Har Esrim. And on that mountain you encounter this obstacle, Mishkal Chassidus. How do I know to make sure that my chumrah is really justified and warranted, and that I'm not through my chumrah actually being mekel and being mezalzel and something else? You know, we've explained it in the past, and maybe this is emes. When it comes to Torah mitzvahs, you're not supposed to make cheshbainis. Right? You don't make cheshbainis. So you wake up in the morning, there's no mishkal you have to make, you just open a Shulchan Aruch. You follow the rules exactly the way you're told to follow it. Chassidus, by definition, is not something you have to do. It's something that's l'fnei mishur sadin. That means I'm already using my own seichel. If I'm using my own seichel, I dafka don't have a blueprint to follow. It wasn't drawn up by an architect. So now I'm making it up as I go along. Oh, you're making it up. You better make sure you get it right. Right? You don't have to make up putting tefillin on in the morning because the Torah tells you to put it. You say, maybe I shouldn't put on tefillin today. No, the Torah says you put on tefillin today. It's very straightforward. You know exactly what you're supposed to do. But Chassidus, you don't know what you're supposed to do. But either way, this is Mishkal Chassidus, which the Ramchal says is the most challenging part of being a chassid. And then the Mesilas Yesharim goes and he gives examples of different tzaddikim throughout the generations that were nichshol in this inyan of Mishkal Achsidus. The most famous example that he gives is Reb Zcharia ben Avkulas. Chazal say, Amar Reb Yochanan, and the Senusha shel Reb Zcharia ben Avkulas is what caused Churban Beis HaMikdash. So we know the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, and Bar Kamsa went and he sent this animal that had a mum, something that's considered a mum for us, but not considered a mum for the Romans, for the Ummah Yisraelim, and they were going to be makrivit out making shalom. Rabbi Zcharia ben Avkula said, people are going to say that you're allowed to be makriv balmum. They said, okay, let's kill Bar Kamsa. He's a roidev. People are going to say, matamum b'kachim yeharik. And they ended up not doing anything. They didn't bring the carbon. They didn't kill Bar Kamsa, and as they say, the rest is history. And Rabbi Yochanan heard that. He said, what was the oimik? Says the Mesilas Yesharim that Rabbi Zcharia tripped up in Mishkal Achsidus, because in his world of Chassidus, he thought the right thing to do was not to bring the carbon and not to kill Bar Kamsa. But really, the right thing to do was to see the bigger picture. And that was where he made a toys. So the great Rabbi Zcharia went ahead and he made a toys. And then he goes there and he gives another example. And that is Umayse de Rab Tarfon Yocheach. I'll bring you another raya. A raya from the great Rav Tarchman. He was machmel like Beis Shammai. The background is a Mishnah in the first parak of Masechtas Brachas, where the Mishnah brings the Machlok Beis Shammai Besil, exactly how you're supposed to learn Kriya Shema. It says, B'shivtecha b'veisecha uvlechtecha b'derech uv'shachbecha uvkumecha. Beis Shammai held b'shachbecha means Kriya Shema shel Arvis, you have to be lying down. Uvkumecha means Kriya Shema shel Shachris, you're supposed to be standing up. Basil says no. B'shachbecha means bizman shebnei adam sheifchim, and uvkumecha means the time that people get up. So the Mishnah says Reb Tarfon was once machmer to be mata like Beis Shammai for Amru Loi, and he came, and what happened was he was lying down somewhere on a bench, and all of a sudden a listim came and they almost killed him, and he made it out alive, and he runs to Beis Medrash and he tells all his chaverim, you know what happened? I almost got killed, and they told him, you know what? You would have deserved to die. Says the Mesilas Yesharim that what Reb Tarfon did when he lied down to say Kriya Shema, afal pisha machmer haya. He was a big machmer. So why did he deserve to die? Reb Tarfon's chayav misa for being machmer like Beis Shammai makes no sense. It's a chumrah. So why can't you be machmer? V'zeh she'inyan machloikis Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The inyan of the machloikis between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel haya inyan kavod Yisrael. It was a very challenging chapter in Jewish history because of the great machloikis that raged between them. V'soif, and at the very end of this very, very difficult time, Nigmar shahalacha kebeis Hillel la'olam. It was gepaskin that the halacha is going to always be like Beis Hillel. Hine kiyuma shel Torah. The kiyum of Torah is shekmar din zeh yishar b'chol toikif la'ad u'la'olmei olamim. That this psak has to be in place forever and ever. And it can never be weakened. So the Torah shouldn't revert back to being two Torahs again, like it almost became in the times of Beis Shammai Misal. It would have been better in the world of Mishkal Chassidus for the great Reb Tarfon to be mekel in Hilchas Kriya Shema like Beis Hillel. You know why? Because as much as Reb Tarfon was being machmer in Hilchas Kriya Shema, he was being mekel in the world of the Machlok Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. And when someone of his ilk is machmer like Beis Shammai, you know what that does? It reinvigorates Shittas Beis Shammai, and it risks the whole Jewish nation ladder. It puts the whole Klal Yisrael in sakana, and that was something that Reb Tarfon made a toss and Zoktim Ramchal in the world of Mishkal Achsidus. V'zelanu le'inayim lirois. Says Ramchal that if you see Reb Zcharia ben Avkulas and you see Reb Tarfon were able to make mistakes in the world of Mishkal Achsidus, how hard it is to navigate this fine line and to make sure you're getting it right. Everybody thought Reb Tarfon as being a machmer, but Chazal saw it. No, and that was the nakuda. He didn't chap how important it was for somebody of his nature not to go of his stature and publicly show any credibility to the world of Beis Shammai. But the Mesilas Yesharim, if you're medayik l'shoinei yazav, when he brings out the chshivos of this baskel, this psak, that the halacha was going to be like Beis Hillel, he says, "V'zeh she'inyan machloikis b'shammai Beis Hillel haya inyan kavod l'Yisrael mipnei machloikis hagedola sharaf sebeneim v'soif." And at the very end, nigmar shalacha kebeis Hillel la'olam. Where do you get that word la'olam from? La'olam halacha kebeis Hillel's pasha. He got it from the Tosefta in Sukkah, in Idiyas, and in Brachas, which is mentioned in Eruvin Daf Zayin and Chulin Daf Mem Gimel Beis. Hina kiyum shel Torah shegmar din zeh If that's the case, says Mesilas Yesharim, the kiyum of Torah is that this Gemara din yishar b'chol toikif. It should remain with the ganzkeit. Lo ad ulo ol me'olam. Where's he getting this from? Where did the Mesilas Yesharim get this from? That it has to be lo ad ulo me'olam. He got it from the word lo'olam. V'lo yechlash b'shum panim. V'shalei te'asa Torah chas v'shalom k'shtei Torahs. I think it's pashut that the Mesilas Yesharim here in Perek Chav is teaching up what lo'olam is. He's bothered with the Torah's Chaim's kasha, and he's saying a different teretz. He's saying, you want to know what lo'olam means? Lo'olam means forever. Lo adu lo omei elamim. The halacha always has to be like Beis Hillel. Because if the halacha is not always going to be like Beis Hillel, well then we're risking going back in time. We're risking having a sakana. In other words, we have a diak. Lo olam halacha is Beis Hillel. What's up? Lo olam. Every machlokes is a hakra. What's the lo olam? We have two pshatim. Teres Chaim said lo olam means every single machlokes. The Ramchal is saying that lo olam means forever and ever. I think in the Roiv Diga vernacular, the Teres Chaim is saying it's la'olam in echos. It doesn't matter what machlokes you have now. You could pick up any one of the machlokes in between Bisham and Yisrael. One spoke out from Reuven Margolis. There are 316 machlokes in between Bisham and Yisrael. So every single one of these machlokes in la'olam, the halach is going to be like Beis Hillel in echos. And the Mesilas Yesharim is saying la'olam in kamos. It has to be this way forever. La'ad ula'ol me'olamim. That's not echos. That's kamos. La'ad ula'ol me'olamim. Two different pshatim of what the la'olam is. It's la'oiv and echos. It's a la'olam and kamos. They're both true. It's elu ve'elu divrei lekim chayim. This is something the halach is like Beis Hillel in kamos, and it's because it's a whole different Inyan. The Inyan Machloek Beis Hillel is a different Inyan. You cannot compare the rules and regulations that govern the Machloek Beis Hillel with the rules and the regulations that govern every other machlokes. Every other machlokes, Klal Yisrael is not at risk. Every other machlokes is based on who's mistaber tfei. This machlokes is a whole different world. The entire union was at stake at the time of this machlokes, and this machlokes was huchra, not based on mistaber tfei, based on a baskol, and that's why it's la'olam in kamos, it's la'olam in echos, b'sham mokim silein and mishni. There's no mokim for anything else. I just want to end with one ha'ar. It's an obvious ha'ar. Everyone's going to ask this, and that is, so we're going through this Be'ez Hashem thoroughly, right? La'olam in kamos, la'olam in echos. Let's go Rishon. We spoke at the Teres Chaim first. Teres Chaim said every single time it has to be halacha b'Yisrael. Is that true? It's not true. Tosfos brings in Sukkot Daf Gimel Amud Aleph from Amram going this 3 times that we pass in Bishamai. And the Ramchal said that the halacha always has to be like Beis Hillel in Kamos. Lo adu lo omei olamim. Everybody knows that Arizal. The Sfarim HaKadoshim say that L'asad Lavai, the halacha is going to be not like Beis Hillel. L'asad Lavai, the halacha is going to be like Beis Shammai. So l'chur, we have a little bit of a ha'ara on the Teres Chaim's la'olam and echos, a little bit of a ha'ara on the Mesilas Yesharim's la'olam of kamos, v'yesh li yashev. We will stop here.